We're actually in the getting into the colder season, so yeah, I will get covered up quite well. So yeah, I'm getting just prepared for it. And talk about prepared, we're all set up. We're on YouTube right now,
Oh, wonderful.
so
Great.
yeah,
So,
we're ready.
welcome, YouTubers. Welcome, Instagrammers. Today, we're continuing right off from the previous live where we talked about Samuel. And really, the story of Samuel is here to illustrate the complexity of the question that we are trying to address, the second question of the adverse childhood experience test. Rene, if you want to show that question for us, if you want to bring it up, so that we can remind the audience what the context
Absolutely.
of this question is. So, the ACE test, adverse childhood experience, is a series of 10 questions that, if you answer, will give you a very good idea of how important the negative childhood experiences you have had are on your behavior today. Okay, so once you've answered the questions, there is a set of statistics that you can go through to compare your answers, and that will more or less set the foundation for you to decide whether you're traumatized or not. So the question here read: a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swore at you, insulted you, put you down, or humiliated you. Okay, or B, acted in a way that made you feel afraid that you might get physically hurt. And the story of Samuel is somewhat circling around the point A, particularly the issue of humiliation, right? As we have seen in my story, Rene, there was this sort of association between the motherly love that I had, the love that I had for my mother, and the stepmother insulting me and therefore humiliating me in that love that I had for her, right? And here the story of Samuel kind of touches on this topic as well, Rene. What do you? Yeah, I think you have some thoughts there to share.
Absolutely. The story of Summer really it resonated for me here on the last live, whereby you were able to show the clashing of the love that he had for this young girl, that he just wanted to teach how to ride his scooter. He enjoyed his scooter. He really liked the young girl, and he just wanted to teach her and give her that experience. But it clashed with the humiliation he received from the village, the humiliation he received from the stories that were being peddled around, and that clash really created this experience for him that we were really getting to analyze. So that's how it manifested, and how I
Absolutely.
perceive the story. Yes,
I love that point, Rene. You can put the question away so that I can see you better as well. Um, I love that point that you're making, and you're making me think also that Samuel, in approaching this girl and saying, "Hey, you can ride the scooter as well," he was approaching this girl from a point of equality and a point of, "Hey, you can grow as much as I can grow." Right? You can
absolutely.
grow like I can grow. Like I can ride a scooter. Look what I can do. But you can also do it, right? So there was this
Mhm.
sort of very childlike almost love, right? Like not ego differentiated in a way. Like I'm not a man and you're a woman and you do the things that women do and I do the things that men do. This man was still coming from a very pure form of love. What I have, you can have. What I feel and enjoy, you can have and enjoy, right? Um, so continuing on from last live, we we are discussing now. We are going back in time, right, towards when he was actually younger, when he was actually a child. And what I'm discussing here is that we have a child who has a very bright, curious mind, a mind that might have gone towards a snake in the bush rather than run away from the snake. And why that is significant is because such a mind has a very active intellect, an intellect that needs a lot of nurturing and feeding. So naturally, that brain goes towards the unknown.
Yeah.
Okay, the
Yes.
unknown is the greatest source of new information, greatest source of novelty, right? We are always seeking novelty somehow to feed our brains in that way. What do we do when we swipe on Instagram. We are novelty after novelty after novelty, right? We are getting that dopamine hit. And some brains really thrive on that novelty, and they are more, in fact, in psychology, we say novelty seeking
Mm,
behavior. Um, so we are supposing that we are not here, we are in the territory of hypothesis, really, right? We
absolutely.
are speculating on this case. So we are supposing that this child is very young, and is very, very curious about the world. And what is not a supposition, what I know about Samuel, is that Samuel, when I asked him about his years before 6 years old, he communicated to me a bit of a split with himself, right? Which was something that we had pointed out in the fundamentals of what trauma does, right? It creates a memory deficit
Lots.
in a way,
Yeah.
and a split within us, right? Between the traumatic event and our idea of ourselves. So we see that there's a bit of a split there, and this child is very curious. And then we also pointed out that for the parent, Rene, it becomes very hard to manage such a child in the context of a very, very conservative environment. And Samuel
Absolutely.
was born in a communist regime, which is very, very totalitarian and restrictive. In fact, in my field, we call these cultures shame cultures, just as actually we call shame cultures, or not shame cultures, but where the issue of shame becomes very relevant in the discussion of monotheistic religions,
Yeah.
like Christianity, Catholicism, and so on, where shame becomes a real part of the conditioning and educational process for children that are born monotheistic religious cultures or families, right? Um, and so now we need to ask what is happening to this child. And that's where I want to focus today, uh, between you and me, Rene. I want to discuss
Absolutely.
what might be happening to this child. So if we go from the context that this child really wants to grow, and that the outside environment, it really feels it's threatening, to its own collective ego, then I want to ask what are the parents to do in that context? How do you think the parents might have to act in the context of an environment outside the house that is going to punish them if they allow the child to naturally grow towards the things that it doesn't know? What are your thoughts on this line?
I think that just picking up from even what you explained on the last live and right now, I feel that they usually have two options. Number one is they have to use the shame that you just mentioned, because they use the shame on the child because they will feel ashamed. Part of the punishment they will get is they will feel ashamed. They're like, why didn't you raise your child correctly? I raised my child correctly. My child doesn't go towards snakes or scorpions' curiosity. You're doing a bad job. Shame on you. And so they will have to use that shame on the child to avoid getting the shame themselves. And I think that's one main thing that they will have to practice on the child, to protect themselves, and mainly to protect themselves, because of for the child, I feel that they will feel that the pressure and the trauma they will put on the child will be positive. They will justify it as positive, you know, the same way some people use physical punishment, saying, it hurts you more than it hurts me. But does it really? I don't think so. So I think that's what I really think that they will do. They will use the shame on the child so that they avoid the shame themselves, while people, the whole village will be talking, look at those parents, those are poor parents, they don't know how to raise their child, the child is just all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have a point there. And, in communist regimes, shame could come with physical punishment as well.
Yeah,
Like, for example, the use of corporal punishment in
yeah,
schools was absolutely common, right? So
yeah.
anything that was shameful to do was met also with physical punishment. And this was not just with children, but with adults as well. People would get literally killed for things that we would consider, trivial. Um, and of course, I'm generalizing, so please, whoever has lived through those times, take me as mostly an ignorant person, right? I'm
Yeah,
broadly generalizing, okay? But things like this did happen. Um, and I know that you have a story, Renee, about actually a parent turning seemingly against the child to
absolutely.
avoid the child getting more hurt. So in a way, I kind of disagree with you, because if you bring
Mm,
that story up, is it is the force of the parent not wanting to get shamed stronger than the force of the parent wanting to avoid shame on the child? It's a very tricky
mm,
one, isn't it?
mm,
We When you think about it, what is the process of normalization? Like, let's say my child is interested in art,
mm.
and schools are all about mathematics and literature and history and so on. And I think that my child will not do well unless he does well in these mathematics and so on. And so I don't nurture his drawings. I don't give good feedback about his drawings and so on. Am I doing this child a favor or a disfavor?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think you are doing them a disfavor, but you're doing yourself a favor because I think the fact that you will have that kind of mindset shows that you grew up normalized. So allowing them to go through that route might feel like a rejection to yourself as well, that you didn't go that route, you know? So you normalize, you took in the society. Since you are part of the society, you took in the society ideals and said, I didn't go that route. So if you go, it shows that I am wrong, right? For my personal ideals. And also it will show that I am wrong in front of the society, that I didn't do a good job in making sure you're one of us because you're supposed to be one of us.
Yeah, and
So
this would hurt very much, especially
yeah,
if these parents, as children, were themselves humiliated
exactly.
in their growth, natural sort of inclinations to become normalized. 30 years later now, 25 years later, that pain resides in themselves. So if they were to take on the task of confronting that shame as a growing adult, as an
Yeah,
objective growing adult, they would have to confront their own pain of suppression as
absolutely.
well. So often, indeed, intergenerationally, we just repeat the same patterns because we just
Yeah.
don't want to turn around and look at the pain. One thing that I heard that comes into the story of Samuel, um, is that, well, actually, this I read in a book called actually, I have it in front of me. It's called Selfie, by
Mm.
Will Storr. And in this book, he was telling us about how fMRI, so brain imaging techniques, show that the pain that we feel when we are rejected and ostracized by a group is felt by the same part of the brain as the pain that we feel when we burn ourselves on a stove.
Wow.
So literally the psychological pain of being excluded, ostracized, isolated is equal to physical pain.
Mm.
We might even argue that it's worse because when you think about it, some of the worst of the worst punishments that are given to the worst people of society is confinement. Like
Yeah.
so you are a normal social person, like a normalized person, but if you go outside that norm a bit too much, then we take you and we isolate you and put you in prison,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In prison we do exactly the same. If you don't behave or don't manage to survive that environment and, I don't know, break the rules, I don't know exactly what the details are, what do we do to the worst cases in that prison? We take them, we
Isolation.
put them in isolation. And apparently, um, I hear that this is like the thing that will break a human being,
Mm.
not major physical violence from which we seem all to be able to recover. Of course, if you're under a lot of violence, you can die under that violence, right?
Yeah.
But isolation. And so shame and isolation are also interrelated, because when we shame somebody, we're excluding them from our circle of love, of our circle of friends, our circle of inclusion, right? So, what can go on as well in the context of a child who really wants to grow towards things that are not normal in that society? In other words, somebody that who can take his own decisions, who has um, a body connection, right, to their intuition, is that we use shame to make them feel the pain of isolation.
Absolutely.
And this is a very subtle mechanism. But Rena, I remember you shared with me a story of a black person in the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wonder if you want to share that with us.
Yeah, yeah. Just to share that, there was this story I got to hear of during the time of segregation in the U.S. There was this mother and child that were walking in a town, and the segregation was that the facilities were segregated. So there was a water fountain for the black people and the water fountain for the white people. However, this child, in maybe his curiosity or just reasoning that whatever fountain was closest he got to use was the white people's fountain, and he just went there and he wants to take a drink. So as he was there, the mother, seeing the child there, uh, also recognizing that there was a enforcement officer, a police officer coming that way, and had noticed the child. At the same time, the mother had noticed the child. The mother decided to be proactive and beat the child in front of the law enforcement, who was a white man. So, as he was beating the child, the law enforcement approached and laughed and said, "You have beat that, your child enough. Let him go," and used the racial slur on the child. And the child was shocked, was wondering, my mother is not usually like this after receiving that kind of beating. But after the police officer had left, the mother explained to the child that, "I beat you that way because if he beat you that way, I will have to fight him and one of us will be dead." So what she did was that she enacted the society's punishment on the child, so that to not just to pun to almost protect the child in a way that let him suffer violence in my hands compared to a stranger. So in that way, that story really showed that the shame of the pain of the kind of isolation, the kind of punishment, I would rather enact it in my hand than compared to a foreigner. And can be something that I think the viewers can really get to meditate on, Nicholas. And you yourself, what do you think about it?
You know, when you were telling that story, the word inoculation came into my mind.
Yeah,
Don't you feel there is almost like the mother is inoculating, like,
yeah,
right, the child from
yeah,
being beaten by a stranger who has no emotional rapport to this
at all.
child, and therefore, in a sense, there is nothing, protecting this child from being severely abused and physically, beaten, which is something we will cover also more in the third question of the ACE test. And therefore, the chances of the child actually dying under that beating are indeed higher, because at least in the mother, even if she's a violent mother, there are still complex dynamics of bonding and other emotions that somehow counterbalance this violence. And in the case of the police officers, there is not. And so, in a way, we could start to interpret this gesture of the mind of the mother as a kind of a protection system, an inoculation, like you would go and give a virus to a body to inoculate that body from an actual viral contamination of a higher proportion, right?
Absolutely. And that's actually such, I just started up a great point to actually leave this particular live. I think we're really out of time, but
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to segue to the next live, where we'll now get into the inoculation and other examples, maybe in other further questions. I've really enjoyed how we've been able to share and on this particular subject. On this particular question, we're still in question two. Thank you so much for Nicholas for joining in.
Thank you, Rene. Thank
um,
you, everyone.
and thank you for sharing your stories. And we will also get to share more stories. Don't forget to make sure you subscribe for the next live when it will be up. And make sure you can even get to engage with us via our email and our handles on Your Shrinking Basco. Thank you, Nicholas, again for joining. Until
Thank you, Rene.
next time.
Bye bye,
Bye bye.
everyone. Bye.